Just hours after having a root canal, I went to see one of my most anticipated movies of the year. And while I will admit that Alien Romulus was a much better experience than sitting in a dentist chair for 2 hours getting fish hooked. If I'm being honest, there were things that I loved about this movie and things that I didn't. Let's discuss.
I watch so you don't have to.
Before I get started, I'd like to kindly ask that you hit the like button and please subscribe to the channel for more content just like this.
What are you waiting for, huh? What are you waiting for?
Space colonizers come face to face with the most terrifying life form in the universe while scavenging the deep ends of a derelict space station. So leading up to Alien Romulus, there was a lot of talk about this movie returning this franchise to its roots. More specifically, bringing it back to its horror-themed roots, which presumably makes a director like Fede Alverez the perfect person to execute that vision. While watching this movie, you can tell that Fede is a huge fan of the franchise. And thinking about it now, it feels like the goal, more than anything, was to bridge the gap between all of the different entries in the franchise. Even the entries that some people don't really care for.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for them.
Yes, this film takes place in between Alien and Aliens chronologically, and that's made very clear throughout the course of the film. But Romulus surprisingly makes much larger connections to other entries in the Alien franchise. And this is something that I actually loved about it. And you know what movies I'm talking about, the polarizing ones that some people seem to hate, but that I personally enjoy. It doesn't ignore those movies, and I found that refreshing as a fan. For context, I am a huge Alien franchise fan, and I enjoy every film in this series to different degrees. And that's what's great about the Alien movies to me. They vary in quality from guilty pleasure all the way up to masterpieces of cinema. I enjoy a lot of the big creative swings that some people seem to hate.
Why are you the way that you are?
That being said, for Romulus, in the simplest terms, I can describe it as this. There are things in this movie that I've never seen in an Alien movie before. And at the same time, there are things in this movie that try a little bit too hard to make callbacks to previous entries. And some of those things were just a bit too on the nose for me. After a while, as an audience member or even a fan, you get to the point where you get tired of having your intelligence insulted. Like when a character in a new movie recites a line of dialogue from one of the original movies word for word, or in just a very overt way. It's never as clever as the writer thinks it is, and it always comes off as very cheap to me. And there is a little bit of that going on in this movie, although it's not a deal breaker.
Oh no, not again.
Right off the bat, I have to say, one of my biggest positives for the film is the world that they built within it. They made sure that everything from the costumes to the environments to the architecture to the technology is consistent with the films that came before, especially with the films that sandwiched this one. I also enjoyed how they touched upon the oppressive nature of the Weyland Corporation this time around. Now, they've always been portrayed as an evil organization who has no problem sacrificing human lives. But in Romulus, you really get to see how their monopoly on everything impacts people's lives on the ground level. In fact, it's the whole driving force behind the characters' motivations in this film. I'm not entirely sure that the main group's objective in this film makes a ton of sense, and I did question how exactly a space station that is in close proximity to a Weyland outpost was kind of just abandoned by the corporation at some point, especially if you take into consideration what is on board.
I don't get it.
Another highlight of the film for me is the relationship between the main character, Rain, and her brother from another assembly line, Andy. Obviously, androids play a huge role in Alien movies, and I would argue that some of the android characters are some of the best characters in the entire franchise. And I did think that Andy was another great example of that. He's not quite as complex as, say, David was, but I did think it was interesting to see another side of androids this time around. A more compassionate and protective side, even if he is programmed to be that way. It's kind of ironic that a android-human relationship is what pushes this story along, especially when we are used to seeing androids being more of a complication than anything.
I'm having trouble.
Obviously, I'm not going to go into super spoiler territory here, but this movie does feature the return of an iconic character, albeit in CGI form. Now, there was a lot of talk about this film before its release about its use of practical effects. And when they are used effectively, and I appreciated when they did that. But the film does still use CGI, and unsurprisingly, those moments are less effective. And a big example of that is this returning legacy character, and they clearly use the Princess Leia from Rogue One technology to bring him to life. And it's a technology that still looks awkward to me. And to make matters worse, this character is basically used, initially, to deliver one big exposition dump. Basically saying, in case you haven't seen the original Alien, this is what happened on the Nostromo. It felt kind of clunky and like they were trying too hard or not hard enough to make connections to previous films.
Game over, man. It's game over.
Romulus obviously features a younger cast of characters predominantly, none of which really left much of an impression on me. They felt like they were quite literally written to be victims for xenomorphs and nothing more. That being said, I think some of the best parts of this movie are the more action and horror-centric sequences. And this is where these situations I've never seen in an Alien movie before come into play. Normally, I would not be impressed by a movie just adding more of something because they think that that's going to make it scarier. But in this case, when it comes to the facehuggers, multiple facehuggers lunging at these people as they run away is terrifying. There's also a pretty intense scene involving the facehuggers that slows things down a little bit and shows them in a way that we've never really seen them before. Another standout sequence for me was a zero-gravity fight with the xenomorphs. It's one of those scenes where it seems like it just keeps going, and the further and further along it goes, things just keep getting worse and worse. And it uses the acid blood that the aliens have in a way that, again, I've never seen before. And yes, for those who are wondering, the xenomorphs look awesome in their practical effects glory.
I like it a lot.
Although, if I'm being honest, this movie was bloody and violent, as advertised, but I was expecting a little bit more when it came to that stuff, especially considering Fede Alverez is again the director. The deaths were pretty standard to me when it comes to Alien movies. Now again, this next part is going to be difficult to talk about without spoilers, but I'll do my best. The final act of this movie is simultaneously batshit insane, and it will also be the most divisive part. As I mentioned earlier, the finale makes direct references to the mythology in some of the most polarizing films in the franchise. Now, if you don't like those movies, then this finale might kill the movie for you. I was personally okay with it because, again, I enjoy the mythology that they established in those films. I do wish it was done with a little bit more practical effects rather than CGI, and a few design changes I think would have gone a long way. For perspective, the ending very much felt like a cross between Prometheus and Alien Resurrection, which is not something that I ever thought I would say.
What the hell am I looking at? When does this happen in the movie?
Bottom line, Alien Romulus did not blow me away like I hoped it would, and it was kind of a mixed bag. To me, its best parts were unsurprisingly when it tried to do new things, because I do feel like that has become the franchise's calling card at this point. Its weakest parts are when it plays it too safe and tries to rope you in with cheap nostalgia bait. Because all that really does is make me want to watch those much better movies that you are referencing. If I had to rank Romulus in the franchise, it would be on the lower end of that ranking. But again, that's not necessarily a bad thing coming from me because I enjoy all of these movies to some degree. Alien Romulus very much feels like a fan film with a budget. But I do think that it's worth watching if you are a major fan of the entire franchise like I am. It was an entertaining but flawed experience for me, and that's why I'm going to give it the Cathouse.
Saved by kitty litter.
Y'all be cool. Right on.